Greetings, Doc John here, and I am the Entreprofessor. And today I'm here with my colleague, friend, and now co-author, Dr. Tom Tavantzis. Tom, it's great to be here with you.
Well, great to be here with you, John.
Good. Well, as I mentioned, co-author. We'll talk a little later about an ebook that Tom and I have written together, and we'll share a little bit about that. But today, we really wanted to just let you in on a conversation. It's really a conversation we've been having over the last several months, and it seemed like it would be interesting to others. So we thought we would just have that conversation today for everyone to join. But as we thought about it, particularly in the context of our ebook, we thought about 5 ways that hardwired great leaders can accelerate the transition to post-pandemic work. And so, one of the things we really are thinking about here is we're in this unique time where we're, kind of moving out of the pandemic phase or moving out of the lockdown phase. And that creates some really interesting leadership challenges. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. But Tom, maybe I'll ask you to start us off a little bit. Just when you think about this idea of post-pandemic work and what the workplace looks like post-pandemic, what's the problem, or what are some of the problems that you see?
Well, there's 2 significant issues, usually not discussed in any sequence. On the one hand, you have this Great Resignation, which was in June, 4 million people, which broke a record, resigned. Then the month before, it was 3.9 million. So now those jobs are oftentimes they're the direct service jobs, but the idea is filtering into more and more people's heads that this is an opportunity for whatever reason, and we don't really know all the reasons. The Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology puts out a list each year after they collect the data of the 10 major trends. And when I looked at that a couple of days ago, number 6 was the Great Resignation. Number 7 was the level of stress and burnout. But the number 1 trend was employee engagement and organizational commitment to remote workers. So that's the third piece. So you have resignations, you have the level of stress. A recent Harris poll that was commissioned by the APA came up with some crazy number here, 37%. Let me just find it, because I don't want to misquote this one. The survey said nearly 1/3 of adults, 32%, said sometimes they're so stressed that they struggle to make basic decisions, such as what to wear or what. And you think about it at a personal level, the pandemic, the changes that have occurred. And I'm not blaming the CDC. It's that you're having to be aware and alert to the changes, and it's constant. You're constantly adapting. So you got the resignation, and you have the stress, and now you're faced with this: how do you engage people? And the biggest changes are among not the boomers, because they're pretty much close to retirement, but more the Gen X, Gen Z, and the other generational millennials. These are pretty high in terms of the level of anxiety they have about the current and the future. They haven't been through this stuff that people from the baby boomer generation have gone through. So this is totally new. And it's created a lot of upheaval. I teach graduate students. I had a class last night, people anywhere between the ages of 26 and 43. And the level of anxiety and unsureness about whether they want to continue and what they're doing is pretty evident. So this is serious. And the remote issue has benefits, but there's also some minuses to it too.
Yeah. Well, and I would think that the Great Resignation would probably mean that most workplaces are affected in some way in terms of turnover, which means there's now work to be done and there aren't as many people there to do it, or there's someone new there to do the work that isn't as familiar with it. So I can see how that could really add to and increase the stress that people are experiencing.
Well, think about it. And your job, when someone would leave the office, would resign or quit, everybody else in the office was thinking, should I be leaving too?
Right. What do they know that I don't know?
Oh, yes, exactly. So you have many people leaving, and you got to be saying, do I want to be the person who closes the door last here? So it's just a huge, huge issue that wasn't there before, and now we're faced with it. And it's about how do you engage? I mean, ultimately, it's going to be about wherever the people land, they still need to be engaged. And that's the crux of the issue.
Right. So, we talked a little, I referenced it a little bit, but maybe let's unpack it. We talked about a hardwired great leader. And, hardwired, of course, talking really about natural abilities, natural giftings, and then the development of those into talents. Great leader, which we'll unpack that in a little bit more detail later, but just the approach to leadership, some of the areas of focus and the kind of the framework there. But in this context, the real question becomes the problem you just laid out. The question becomes for a leader who's leading a team, probably been leading through a lot of virtual engagement and through the pandemic and all those kinds of things. Now we're moving to this next phase, this post-pandemic era, and the leadership approach is probably going to have to change. It's a very new environment. So just interested in your preliminary thoughts of what are some of the things that a leader should be thinking about moving into this era?
Well, I think given who is experiencing the most stress, the millennials and the Gen Z, and I think the expectation that they have, perhaps I'm wrong on this, but for what I understand, is they want meaningfulness. They want to know that they're going to be moving into the company and moving up, and that they're being addressed, that their personal concerns are being addressed, and they want development. And so there is a push, if you want to use that word, authenticity, more authenticity in the work environment where people are this more transparent, especially given the remote nature. Transparency is one way that you're going to get people engaged.
Yeah, that's excellent. So let's dive in a little bit to really our 5 ways that a hardwired great leader could accelerate this transition. So one of the first topics, and you and I have talked about this a lot, others that have heard us or have met with us have heard a lot about it, this premium nature of time. And I think, as a leader, starting to view time a little bit differently, where you're really asking the question, am I wasting time? Am I spending time, or am I investing time? And we talk about it in the ebook as the 168-hour problem.
Right. Talk about that a little bit.
Right. I mean, everybody only has 168 hours in a week. And you hear different people talk about this in different ways. I always think of an author named Ed Wallace who wrote a book called Fairs to Friends that talked about 168 hours and just that problem of only having 168 hours. And so with that premium, it really starts to point to this idea that every hour is a very scarce piece of real estate in your world. In the next 7 days, you have 168 blocks that are 60 minutes long, and that's it. And once they're gone, they're gone. And you can waste them, you can spend them on something, or you can invest them. And there are, times that are probably good for all of those. But for a hardwired great leader who's really wanting to accelerate this transition, what are some ways what are some things you think they should really be thinking about in terms of this constraint that we all have?
Well, it struck me when you talk about 168 hours, how do you want to spend them?
Yeah.
Well, and it seems to me that what we know is that people, when they work from their strengths, are less likely to experience stress and more likely to experience satisfaction. So then it's simple to say, okay, well, in that 168 hours, how much time are you putting in to working from your strengths?
Yeah.
And that assumes that a person has some idea of what their strengths are, which not, as we know, Peter Drucker told us many, many years ago, people think they may know what their strengths are, but they don't. And they certainly don't even know what their weaknesses are, even though they think that too.
Yeah.
So how do you spend the time and how do you use what you have that you're hardwired to use? That's the challenge. Knowing thyself. I mean, there's a reason why the ancient Greeks had it on the temple over Delphi. It was the idea was you need to know how to maneuver yourself, how to move yourself forward based on what it comes easy to you.
Yeah, what their strengths are. Well, I mean, I think I'd be remiss in kind of moving past this topic without asking you to talk a little bit about, how do you really find out where those strengths are? Because I know I've seen you do this for so many people, myself included. Just talk a little bit about that process and how you've experienced.
There's an instrument that we use. Been using it since 1993. It's called the Highlands Ability Battery. It's an assessment that takes about 3.5 hours to complete. That's based on you doing various work samples rather than choosing multiple choice answers.
Yeah.
And the idea is that each of these 18 different work samples looks at a different cognitive trait. And those cognitive traits are related to work. Yeah. And so the assessment gives you a timed period to attack a particular puzzle, which reflects a cognitive trait. And then you end up with a report and a profile that suggests where your strengths are cognitively, where are some of the areas that aren't as strong, and how that might pull you to certain work roles in the environment that come easier to you rather than ones that come harder to you.
Yeah. Could you give a couple of examples of just some areas that this would assess?
Well, for instance, a proclivity towards brainstorming. Okay, so you're asked to solve a problem that reflects how many ideas you can come up with in a short period of time. It's not a question of whether they're good ideas or bad ideas. It's just how many can you come up with in a short period of time. So people who score high on that, and when I say high, it's anywhere from 0 to 100 percentile. Yeah. As you move more towards the 100 percentile, you're someone who finds it easy constantly to come up with new ways of thinking, not necessarily creative. Just you come up with ideas. Some of them could be very bad, some of them could be good, but the roles that pull you are towards persuasion and influence and being able to overcome resistance, being able to, a good salesperson, for instance, when you go to, in the old days, when you went to a car shop and you had to deal with the car salesman, he would find your ways of talking to you, even if you were a little resistant, he could come up with alternatives. Sure. So that person is drawn towards roles where they can brainstorm. On the other side of the spectrum are people who are, it's not that they don't have ideas, they need more time to come up with them. And a role that pulls them more would be in terms of follow through, keeping the vision, not changing direction that every day as they come up with a new idea, but keeping focused and following through. So then it becomes a question of where are you on this continuum? And do you know people on your team and where they stand? So you can work then to make sure that people work from roles where they are getting to use their strengths rather than not. That's
so what happens if somebody ends up in a role where they're using a lot of their 168 hours outside of their sweet spot? I mean, what happens?
Well, I think that's where you're getting dissatisfaction, because dissatisfaction comes, or stress comes from having a strength and not being able to use it. Yeah. We can compensate, we can develop skills, and most people, of course, we're adaptable. We can develop skills in a variety of areas. But the real question is, what is it that comes automatically almost to you, almost without thinking? What do you do? Do you just generate ideas, or are you a person who's more focused? And that's one of the 18 traits that we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, and so it sounds, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like knowing where your superpowers are and just operating within those strengths. Yeah, that's really good.
Well, try to operate within your strengths, like 80% of the time.
Right, right.
I'm not going to get to 100. Everybody's got to do something they don't like.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody's got to take out the trash or wash the windows or do that thing that just do the paperwork, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, good. Well, so let's move on to just our second way that a hardwired great leader could accelerate this transition to post-pandemic work. And I think we've talked a lot about this, just being the inspiration and taking this as a leader, bringing inspiration. And I think a lot of times when someone says something like, "Oh, you want to be the inspiration," everybody thinks of like, giving exciting speeches or, jumping up on the desk and, rah, rah, you're really cheering everyone along. But, and a lot of times the inspiration can just be showing everybody how to do it, like just demonstrating what it would look like to kind of be in an idealized state, or really, setting the bar high, saying, I think we can do better. Let's drive for more. So really being that inspiration.
Did you have a leader that you have in mind? When you talk about that, I got that feeling that you do, but
yeah, I'm so glad you asked me about that. And you're probably asking for memory from conversations long ago, but I had a mentor, boss, leader for 16 years, who was really an inspiration as a leader and as a friend and just in my life. Her name was Penny Vanderholm, and she was one of these people that just had so much energy. It was like her energy never seemed to run out. And she would just know how to lead one person at a time. She would really engage with someone at their level with, what was really important to them. And she would really work with them in that context. And she just had that, very relational approach, but very specified. And she was not someone that would just kind of leave things to slide or anything like that just because there was a good relationship. She would really push to, like, everybody should be at their best and do their most. But she knew how to do that with each person really well. And she was just an inspiration to her team, people who worked for her, but also with her peers and with those who led her, just really changing the game, just getting everyone excited and inspired to really do their best work. So yeah, I've definitely seen a great example of that. Now, where would I think in these areas, I mean, this is definitely, knowing yourself, expressing your strengths. What are some of your experiences about where those connect?
Well, I think that, there's a couple of different variables, again, that we look at. One would be, where is this person on the continuum of being a group-oriented person versus more of a technical, specialized knowledge kind of worker. And that distinction is important because one person is going to be out there with the group, with the team, working through and understanding what's going on, while another person will lead very differently. And it's going to be influenced where they are in terms of their introversion, extroversion as well. Because someone who's an extroverted leader, who's also out there in terms of working and getting work done through others as what we would call a generalist, is someone who's exciting others and gets where the team's going and is kind of saying, let's go, folks, let's go do this. We're excited. We're into it. And that's not just a leader. There are other styles that you can. So it would be, for instance, the specialized leader who's extroverted leads through getting people impassioned about a vision. There was a fellow who I worked with I thought it was the best leader that I've seen. I didn't work for him. He brought me into his pharmaceutical company to work with his staff. And as a director, he was someone who could get people to do things that they never thought they could, just because of his passion. He was an expert in his area, and he had these solid values in terms of the importance of what they were doing, which was quality assurance for pharmaceutical companies, which can't get more important than that, frankly. Yeah. But he was able to kind of communicate with people, generate ideas, be warm, connected, but also at the same time show them, here's the vision that we're going to, and he'd get people on board, and he could mobilize people. Very different styles, but equally as effective.
Yeah. Well, it resonates in what you described there. And I think my experience that I talked about with Penny as well is just that ability to connect people with the purpose. So, and part of that comes with knowing the individual abilities, strengths, and aspirations of the individuals, but also really having a pretty clear vision for what the purpose is and really where the team needs to go and how each person needs to connect in that. You often hear the metaphor of like rowing in the same direction and those kinds of things. It's, I think, a powerful leader is really able to do that. I think that's going to be really important in this post-pandemic era where it has been a little bit more scattered as to what's the purpose, what's the direction. So, being able to provide that real clear connection between people and their individual skills, talents, abilities, and really where the organization needs to go and how the team needs to operate as a high performance team.
Yeah, I just don't think it's going to make it any longer for a leader to be indifferent or just assume that people are going to get paid and show up and do the job.
Yeah.
You're not capturing, now it's about capturing people's hearts too.
Yeah.
And it's not just words, it has to be connected to something that's more meaningful in terms of taking the time to understand and figure out who are these people who are surrounding me, and what do they want, and what are they looking for in their lives and careers, and how can I help that development?
Yeah.
It's a different. I think that this trend, as many things with the pandemic, it accelerated a trend. Yeah. It was happening, and now it's happened, I think, quicker and fast, certainly.
Yeah. So let's move to our third thing, which is just taking advantage of the clean slate for culture. And, culture is so much, gets a lot of buzz. You mentioned Peter Drucker a little bit earlier, famous for saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Certainly a ton of research about how important culture is in terms of creating high performance, creating retention, job satisfaction, wellness, kind of human flourishing, a lot of connections to culture. So you may talk a little bit about really this opportunity a leader may have it may be the same team even, but now it's like a new era. There's sort of this opportunity to reset the standard for culture. What are some ways that could come into play?
I think in the ebook, I think, one of the things that I really liked and I'm getting positive feedback on are some of the exercises that you put in it. Yeah. I mean, those are really helpful in terms of getting people to think about the teams and moving forward on that. The culture piece is, if you're committed to figuring out or helping people figure out what their best contributions are, then you also want to try to articulate or have them articulate what it is that they can do. What is it that they're striving for? And part of that is for folks to learn about their strengths so they can be articulating to the leader. It's not, leader doesn't have a looking glass to kind of figure out, oh, this is what this person needs. No, it's really, how are you going to work with them so they can articulate to you what it is that they can bring? Because leaders have a very short radar, and they see you for one thing, and then they make a box and they put you in that box, and that's what you're known for. And your job is to help expand the box to be able to say, look, there's other areas and strengths that I can produce in and be productive in.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the message for the leader is to be careful not to be quickly putting their team, their followers into those boxes that maybe aren't even the right boxes. They may have the wrong idea in their mind, and then putting someone into a situation that doesn't leverage their strengths starts to add stress. So it's that, knowing those. What about, I've heard you talk before a lot about complementarity of teams, and just those talents. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, let me. Okay, so you said the leader should take some time to figure out what's going on. Well, if they don't, they're really just pulling stuff out of their head that really reflects them. And so they end up projecting onto the other about what they should be doing. And they may or may not be wrong. I'm not saying that they're 100% wrong, but they may be off target. And so figuring out complementarity to me is kind of basic as a leader. I had a guy who was, again, most of my work was with scientists and engineers, and this fellow was, he had just become a director of quality assurance lab. And he felt so much stress over the first 8 months because he felt he had to make all the decisions. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that he did was, aside from bringing me in, but was to get people to understand, to take the ability battery, to begin to articulate how the talents that he was surrounded with, which were considerable, and to accept the fact that he could then delegate, work with people who had strengths in areas that he didn't have, which was basically, they were great problem solvers. He had people around who had talent and problem solving. His was not that. His was in making decisions and picking a direction and sticking to it. So he learned to throw the problem out to his kitchen cabinet, which is what he called them. And then he would make the final, he was the decision maker.
Yeah. So it's knowing those strengths, it's knowing, who in their sweet spot and when they're in it, and then being able to articulate that to them and each other, and so that everyone understands their role, and then really bringing all the pieces together, is what I hear there. And I think too, just, in terms of culture, articulating what the leader really desires the culture to be. I think that seems like a very important thing. And this is a really good time to be able to do this. If a team has really been working remotely for a long time, they're coming back together, which is a great opportunity to really sit down and say, let's talk about what our culture is, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and and what maybe should our culture be, and what are some things we could do to really start to make a shift. If the culture has some toxic elements, like how do we get those out of our patterns of interaction? If there are some things that are really encouraging and enriching, like how do we double down on those? Or if there's some things, if like performance is sort of moderate, it's like, how do we take that to the next bar? It just feels like a really good opportunity to be able to start connecting those dots.
But, as you're saying it, John, how do you get that to happen? Because I don't know about you, but I haven't seen that as frequently.
Yeah.
Have you? I mean, how do you bring it about in terms of some of the work that you do?
Yeah, well, a lot of the clients I've worked with, it really starts with that, what's there that should be and what's there that it shouldn't. And then the second thing is what's missing. And so I think that's the first part. I actually think there's an interesting parallel to what we've talked about with natural abilities. Like for an individual who's really wanting to leverage their strengths and help everyone else to understand where their strengths are, there's sort of this opportunity, once they really know themselves, they can articulate where those strengths are and where those sweet spot, fastball, superpower, whatever metaphor you want to use, where those are. I think you have the same thing with culture. If a leader can really help the team get clear on what are the things that we want to be part of our culture, and now how do we make sure we're talking about those regularly to each other and those outside the team? How do we just make that the stories we tell ourselves are the ones that really fit with the future that we want. And I think another piece of it, and I think with the Great Resignation we talked about at the beginning, this is going to come up a lot. It's bringing new members into the team. It's like, what culture do you bring them into? That's they call that acculturation. And I think what I like about the term acculturation versus like assimilation, or some of the other enculturation, some of the other terms that are out there, it acknowledges that, number one, there's an environment that this new person's coming into, and you want to help them to kind of adapt and adjust and be part of that. but it also acknowledges this is a unique individual coming into it that's now going to change that environment. And I think, high assimilation type approaches look to kind of push that out of the person. Like anything that doesn't fit our culture, like you gotta, push that deep inside yourself, or keep your mouth shut, or don't bring that up. Acculturation acknowledges that, hey, this new person coming in is, adding to our diversity. It's adding to our unique perspective. It's, bringing in complementary experiences, views, abilities, and how do we bring that make that part of the story, not something that happened after the story. So I think those are things that leaders can really take advantage of. And I've found a lot of the clients I've worked with have a lot of success. Really, what are the stories we tell to ourselves, and then when someone new comes in, how do we tell them the story? Maybe not tell them everything from the past, because we want them to just pick up those old patterns. We talk about the things that are really important to the way we want to operate and the culture we want to have going forward.
Yeah, that storytelling is I think is a key in terms of the culture. But here's a current problem. So this guy's he's been around his company for a while, and he was talking last night to me about how the toxic larger culture, and he on his team is trying to insulate his team from the toxicity around them. And so this is not at the CEO level. This is kind of a directorship, if you want.
Yeah.
The struggle, how's
that working for him?
He's trying it. It's, he's not planning to leave his company, but he is struggling with that issue. And I struggle with trying to think about how I can be helpful to something like that.
Yeah. Well, and how important, so important, just because, you're seeing all this research. And I think this is where you're just seeing, you talked about all the many theories about the Great Resignation. One is, I think, there's sort of a better sense of, I want to be appreciated, as an employee. I want to be appreciated, understood, valued. And, the likelihood is that best talent isn't going to stick around if that feeling isn't there. And so if there's a toxic environment on the team or in the larger environment, that's likely to have an adverse effect. So, well, let's talk about the fourth thing. So
Sure.
We talked about just that premium nature of time. We talked about being the inspiration. We've talked about, taking advantage of the clean slate for culture. But, we talked before about connecting people with purpose, and that really starts to get to how do you achieve, like, you bring everyone together and you're moving in the same direction together, you're going after the same things, and that to me is really about, like, rethinking goal setting. And that sort of thing. So, we talked a little bit about complementarity teams. I think that might be something to talk about here. Also just, articulating or just working from strengths, that kind of thing. So maybe just talk a little bit about your experience around goal setting and where you think goal setting should change as we move into the post-pandemic era.
Well, one of the things that, going back to this Highlands ability battery, one of the things that we try to measure is something called time frame. It's an exercise, again, looking at trying to understand how far do you naturally think ahead? What's your frame of reference? Do you think a month, 3 months, 5 months, a year, 5 years? People who come out on this particular exercise as this is a strength for them are people who are able to envision the future. They are strategic planners. They're the people who you want to turn to kind of say, come up with and look at a longer term vision. I had an opportunity to work at DuPont with some of the researchers in drug development. Uniformly, these people all had this ability of high time frame. They were able to kind of picture themselves 7 to 10 years into the future, because drug development takes 10 years. Yeah. So they fit. On the other side of the world, in that particular dimension, are people who are low time frame. And these are people who are the firefighters, not literally, in an organization. They're the ones who strive on putting out the fire. Give me a problem, let me fix it. I work with a lot of engineers, electrical engineers. Oftentimes, that's where they come up, low time frame. They want to fix the problem. But so if you're a leader and you have low time frame, that's not the end of their career. It's a question of, can you develop skills, first of all, to help you extend your time frame from maybe 3 months to 6 months out to 3 years through kind of breaking down the segments into 6-month segments, or you bring on your team and you look at who are the people who are high time frame and how can they be helpful in kind of planning and strategically thinking about the future and goals for the organization. To me, this fellow who I was telling you was this great leader, Dr. Speasy. We were in a workshop and he had 18 of his research scientists there, and 16 of them were low time frame as he was. 2 were high time frame. He was a very dedicated leader, so he had this workshop and he was going to get the most out of it. And their job's quality assurance, so they have to find the flaws and fix the quality of the medication, the sites. He was excluding, not purposefully, and they felt excluded, these 2 people who were high time frame. And when they had this dialogue in the workshop, it was about, you guys are always focused on the Band-Aid and getting it, and he would say, of course, we have an emergency. He says, but we never step back to think long term. How do we not have this keep happening? So it's kind of like, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I just said like the root cause analysis, like taking the time to like dig into it and to think in terms of what could.
Too busy.
Good. Well, so interesting there. I mean, there's a principle working from strengths. Each person, if you have team members that are high time frame versus low time frame, you may have those that are really good at kind of taking a step back and looking at the process and thinking about how can we implement a process change or a different approach for the longer term. But you may have those that are really should be on point for the here and now, the problem that just really crop up needs immediate attention. And it sounds like there's really a principle of complementarity there as well, where there's having multiple perspectives in terms of time frame could really be powerful, particularly in goal setting, where goal setting may be setting a goal that is 6 to 12 months out, or as you said, in some cases, it might be 5 to 10 years out. And so there's going to be those that are really wired to be able to set those kinds of goals. But then the execution really need to be at least may need to have other people on point for that with someone that's really ready and prefers to live in the here and now.
Yeah, this being able to kind of understand where on your team are these people on this continuum from low to high time frame gives you flexibility as a leader in terms of bringing people in. The worst case scenario is someone who's high time frame, and I've seen this, and this is a major cause of dissatisfaction, is they're in roles where they have to make, fix problems now. And they can do it. Again, people are adaptable. But over time, those skills, when you rely on skills and not your strengths, eventually it takes more energy, time, and therefore dissatisfaction and stress kind of builds. So you can't fool yourself for too long when you're in a role that pulls the wrong parts of you.
Right. Yeah, well, like you said, that increases that stress level or leads to dissatisfaction. Yeah, makes sense. So let's talk about the fifth thing that this hardwired great leader can do in this post-pandemic era, or really to prepare for it. We think about orienting time and focus. I think in the ebook we call it's chess match, right? Yeah. So and I think this kind of ties into some of the things we just talked about as well. But just talk a little bit about this whole thinking of like, how do we look at the world in front of us, longer term, but also like right around us. We've got all these competitors, all the different competing ideas, different alternatives, different things that are maybe interfering or impacting the business or the vision. How does that leader really start to handle that and approach that differently in this era?
Oh, well, that's a big one.
Ending on an easy question, right?
Yeah, really. For me, I think part of would be helpful for leaders at this point to kind of do a vision check where they take a step back and they get some assistance in terms of kind of talking through first with someone, a trusted advisor, someone who they can kind of bounce ideas off and kind of reconsider their vision and then bring it out and test it with their team to get people on board with it, to get their input on it, and suggesting that it's going to be more collaborative approach than perhaps it may have been in the past. These are big challenges, okay? These are not overnight kind of things that are going to happen. So there's going to be a lot of angst and struggle. And the people who are going to win are the people who are smart enough and aware enough to see that business isn't being done as usual.
Yeah.
The assuming that it's going to be, I think, is a mistake.
Right. Well, and just having that emotional intelligence to be able to recognize that in themselves. I think the other thing you talked about was at the beginning was just authenticity. I think a danger could be to bring everybody back and say it's all going to be different, and then then continue forward in the same patterns that create those toxic environments, or really just push people into a box that's maybe not even right for them, or limits their ability to use their natural talents. So it just seems like there's a real critical element of that authenticity in that transition.
Oh, no doubt about it. And when you look at the history of pandemics, there's always been major changes as a result of these kind of large catastrophes that are unchangeable. No one's going back to some things.
Right. Yeah.
People have gained time. They don't spend an hour commuting to their job. I mean, it's going to be hard for them to go back and say, okay, I'm going to give 10 hours a week now to commute again, when they realize there's more to their life. Yeah.
Well, and there'll even be a question of, is it even a good thing if they did? Because you go to that 168 hours and does it really make sense to spend 10 of them in the car? Maybe 4 is better, and you can still accomplish more in both segments, in the professional segment and the personal segment.
And that whole idea that productivity was really good. I mean, I saw the data the other day. I just don't remember it. How high productivity was during the height of the people working from home.
Interesting. So it really points to their part of the post-pandemic work environment will probably be a bit more hybrid than it had been prior to it. It would seem. So I think really all of these point to what I think is really interesting for anyone who's in a leadership role or moving into a leadership role, of this ability to leverage natural abilities and talents, and just knowing what they are for themselves, but then applying some of these leadership approaches that are a little bit better suited for the times. And when you think about, we've talked about a leadership framework here that has 5 big components to it. The natural abilities battery, at least a dozen different areas and lots of different kind of, different combinations. And so you think about bringing these together would really give a leader an opportunity to not just subscribe to the leadership program of the day, but rather to really nuance their particular approach to leadership based on their own natural abilities, and to become really very unique as a leader. And I think that's something that, it really came out of this. And you and I have worked with with companies trying to implement this type of approach and helping leaders to really get an idea of what their unique approach is. And it is very different than in the past. It was like, here's this leadership model. It's got a name that sounds very powerful and important, and it's got several principles, and everybody needs to mold themselves into this to be an effective leader. And I think this is a very different kind of a thing. It's really recognizing where those true strengths are, where those principles of leadership that are adaptive enough to deal with the kind of the ambiguity and the volatility of the world we're living in, and then bringing those together in a very specific way to focus leadership on this is the path forward. This is the way to move ahead in this post-pandemic era and to be successful in it. I think just really interesting to see that combination.
I have to say, John, that the 5 principles, the leadership that you bring to me has been like opened my eyes to different applications, because now I'm seeing that these principles exist for people, they work, and now we're building this foundation underneath them that they can be expressed. Different people with different abilities are going to express those 5 principles, which they need to own differently. So to me, that was the surprise that I got out of this collaboration with you, and that's what I learned. So
yeah, likewise. Well, and it is, I hope everyone that reads the ebook has as much fun reading it as I think you and I have had creating it. And just, we've already had this opportunity to work with some really exceptional leaders in, very large organizations, and just, just really helping to process what some of the possibilities are, some of the potential. And so it's been really exciting just to see that in this early phase. And so I'm really looking forward to, seeing what the response to the ebook. Mentioned before, it's called Hardwired to be a Great Leader. In a lot of ways, it is a very nice blend of content that both Tom and I have been developing independently for a number of years, and then kind of bringing the connection together. Tom, of course, author of a book called Hardwired, and I've over many years, developed this program called the Great Leader Program. And, so Hardwired to be a Great Leader is really the coming together of these 2 ideas. And so it is about to be released. By the time you're watching this, it probably has been released. So in the description and in the kind of the notes here, I'm going to include a link if anyone wants to go and check it out. And if you have ideas, questions about it, we'd love to hear from you, and just really thinking about this new era that we're moving into, and what it means for leadership, what it means for self-awareness, and that really self-development, that high performance coaching and high performance operation as an individual, as a leader, and as part of large organizations. And, really this opportunity, the world is changed forever. It's permanently changed. And now there's this opportunity to, as a leader, to really change in a way that's going to really carry yourself, your organization, your team forward in some really exciting new ways in this post-pandemic era.
Very good. Well said.
Great. Yeah. Well, Tom, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got a chance to do this. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. I hope this has been a useful conversation to hear and be part of. And we'd love just to hear your feedback about this discussion and the ebook if you have a chance to read it. So really, thanks for being here. Well, thanks for everyone for being here with us. It was great having you drop in on our conversation, and look forward to engaging with you in the future. Okay. Hope you have a great day and keep going.